Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you're joining us from. So, today we are going to solve for you the CTF challenge, Wizer CTF challenge number 11, which is different than the number one we advertised, correct, Itzik?
Yeah, so 11 is the one we're working through today.
Okay. So, number 9 will show maybe next week.
Okay.
Okay. So, this is for those of you who don't know, we launch every 2 weeks, if I'm correct, a new CTF. So we have a community that they love this CTS because it's a great way to sort of challenge yourself and learn how to do secure coding and get into this mindset of a hacker or of an attacker. And there is a leaderboard, so it's a really cool platform. There is both a public and a private. Private is for companies that do it only for their own dev team, and the public one is open for anyone. The one we're looking at today specifically is the one from the public, correct?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So let's learn something. Tell us a little bit about the challenge. What is the goal? What do we expect the players to do? And then how did you? What's the right solution?
Right. Yeah. And then we can talk about takeaways, which is
Yep.
important. So yeah, so it's a simple task manager that I'm requested. I'm assuming that I'm Dave Cohen, okay, with an ID 124 or 10024. That's my ID. So I'm assuming some authentication here. I'm logged in, but I'm expected to get the tasks for someone else. So I'm expected to do something that typically I wouldn't be able to do. I want to see the tasks for someone else that I'm not logged in as. Okay. So what do we have here as code? We have two endpoints. There might be others. Those are the two endpoints that I have. One gets the users. So there's a NoSQL, query here that per the array of users that you provided, it returns the user records of the users that you specified. And then there's another endpoint that returns the tasks of a user. So you provide a user ID and you get the tasks. So it's very easy to get Dave Cohen or Dave Cohen's tasks because I have it. So how do I solve it? How do I tackle it? Okay. So let's move on to a Postman. So I'm going to tackle it separately. I have two endpoints here. First endpoint gets the users. I'm looking at what I'm doing here. So I have 124 or 10024. I'm going to send that. I'm going to get the record for, I'm going to get the record for Dave Cohen, right? I also have an API endpoint here, which I already ran, to get, the tasks. Okay, so I have both endpoints. What can I do then? I see that the number is really numeric and it could be sequential. So I can try, hey, let's try to guess. Let's go three top. Let's look at it. Oh, that's another person. So yes, it is actually number by number. So I can try to guess, go one by one. I'll do 128. And then this is Jeff Gonzalez. That's exactly the person that I need. So all I need to do now is to go to the other endpoint, right? And I can place 10028, hit that thing, and I get the tasks for another user. Simple, right? So with that solution, I can go with the payload and put it right here and solve the challenge. Okay. So yeah, copy it. Didn't copy quite. Give me 1 second. Oops. Copy. Then left with the, yep, here it is. Hit hack. And I'm going to the leaderboard, which I'm not going to do right now. Okay. And I solved the challenge.
Cool. So this was a single paper, right? So this is
Yep.
relatively an easy challenge, as you guys can see. However, some people found it hard, and we'll talk about it in a second why. But before we jump there, what's your conclusion?
So the main conclusion here, it comes to educate us that authentication is not enough. There's also authorization. We can't skip it. Okay. So the fact that I'm logged in and I'm authorized to access the system, it doesn't give me authorization to access other types of data, which I might not have the rights to do. So authorization is extremely important. And even though this application does, or this application has authentication, it doesn't have authorization, and that's the big problem.
So, what I like about this example is that it sort of demonstrates where, for example, scanners and other automation tools have a weak spot. Because if I was a scanner, based on what you said, I would have looked at the parameters and say, are they sanitized? Because I'm looking at the code that is in front of me, right? So
Mhm.
that's what I would basically point out. And even if you sanitize it, it won't help in this case. The problem is that there's a whole missing section, whole missing section that you called it, basically that you said the authorization piece, and that's something that can be easily missed when you're writing the code if you don't have this layer and you funnel everything through it.
Exactly. So what we've seen people do is just like scanners. They're like, okay, there's a user ID here that it's not sanitized, and they started digging in. And what they concluded first, people try to solve it. Originally, they were starting to try to do NoSQL injection because it looks like, hey, there's no SQL query here. There's probably a way for me to just trick the system and get another task for someone else. So we're trying to dig into NoSQL injection. That's not the solution here. Solution is here different. It's more logical, and that's why, as you mentioned, Gabby, scanners are less capable of identifying those logical problems.
So how often do you think we see this in the wild? Is this like, oh, it doesn't happen, like it hardly ever happens? Look, this is something simple.
So while the challenge is very simple, we're seeing it in the wild quite often. IDORs are probably one of the most common, vulnerabilities, definitely for younger apps, because it's something that is not embedded in the process that we're doing. We're really focused on authentication, and this cross-referencing other records is something that is hard to think about as you build a system. So we're seeing them a lot, and even though it's very easy, in this case, you still have to be an authenticated user. That's great. So you pass the authentication. But you're still, if you're an authenticated user, you can get access to someone else's record. It's a big problem. So yes, it is definitely common,
It's
unfortunately.
in the, I don't know if they specify specifically IDOR, but this is authentication and authorization is in the OWASP top 10.
Absolutely, absolutely. And yes, all sorts of angles to tackle the same idea of being able to access different records, from a non-authorized standpoint.
Gotcha. Okay. Um, Give me some key takeaways for the people that are watching.
Absolutely, it's
And
very
yeah,
important, very easy, yet very, very important, right? So we said one big takeaway: never skip authorization. Always think, if I'm authenticated, it's not enough for me to get everything, right? I need to make sure that only authenticated authorized people get access. So I want to make sure that I get the subset of data that only that I'm able to access. So authorization, never skip it. One big takeaway. The second takeaway is, in this case, it's weaker because it's very easy to guess the next numbers, right? We took 10024, 10025, just go by multiple numbers, we got it, right? But even if the number is complicated, even if you have a unique identifier, even if guessing the next ID is hard, it is still not means for to replace authorization. And the reason is that there's always some way to trick the system, 99% of the ways, to get those IDs. So those IDs are just identifiers. They help the database fetch the right data. That's what it is. It's never meant to be a security component. And we have to make sure that we're not confusing them.
yeah. So I've talked in the past with a few people that were saying, but who can guess a GUID? And just going back to sort of what you've said, and I've heard that unfortunately more than once.
Mhm.
So I think actually in this example you sort of show this, right? Like in order to get the tasks, I needed the user ID, and I got the user ID from somewhere else. So potentially you may have a low severity vulnerability that
Mhm.
exposes IDs, for example,
Yep.
which doesn't necessarily mean you leaked information, but that low severity becomes critical or high severity when combined with another API
Absolutely.
that allows you to fetch data
Right.
without authorization.
Absolutely. So this one again was guessable. We have other challenges here. They're not very guessable. So we have a UUID, sometimes guessable, very hard though, right? And UUID version 4, almost impossible. However, that's not the case. The case is there's always somewhere else you can get those IDs. So we have other challenges that we also even reviewed in one of our sessions that you can find. It's a UUID, very hard to guess, but you can still find them through some other vulnerability. So you get the ID. The ID doesn't mean anything on its own, but if you combine it with the IDOR, then you get something meaningful that could be very dangerous.
Yeah. So if people want to like try it out, it's still open, right? So like all of those public
Absolutely
ones,
always. Yep.
even though there is, can you show how do you get first of all to the before that to the key takeaways? There is a
Yes.
write up,
So
correct?
there's a write-up, walks you through the goal, description of the code. We talked about it quickly. And then what's wrong with that? Then how would a successful attack, again, that's not going to give you the answer. It's going to walk you through the thought process of the answer. And then, so what? Why is it so bad? And then key takeaways. That's what it
And
is. So
this
the
is
takeaways we talked about.
Yeah, and this is a free resource, guys. So this means that if you want to train your development team and you want to do it maybe once a month on a specific topic or once a week, we have so many challenges. So an example is going to the challenge. It's live. Can you? So the URL is Wizer-CTF, right? If they go
Yes,
to that,
yes. So if you go, let's go to number, yes, it's Wizer CTF. So if you go to wizerctf.com without anything, okay, you can either log in as a user, which I did right now, and even if you're not logged in, you can still play as a guest. Okay, so you don't have to even be logged in to play. You don't have to identify yourself. The only place is if you win the flag, you will need to put your name if you want to be on the leaderboard. You don't have to as well. You can
right?
win the flag and skip it, but you can play it anonymously completely or as a user.
And the red ones are still open,
Exactly.
correct?
Yeah,
So
we
we can
released the
see here 6 challenges that there's no write up, that if you want to solve it, you'll have to try to solve it.
Mhm.
If you are struggling and you want help from others, we have a Discord channel. So on the bottom right, it's pretty active, and you can ask other people in the community, work together, try to figure it out. If you go even more back to challenges beyond I think the last six, you can see they are purple.
Mhm.
Purples are ones that are retired. They have a write up. Again, the solution is not spelled out, but people have enough information there to solve it. So you can play with it. You can try to solve it yourself. So that's all the retired ones. And we add a write up and introduce a new challenge every 2 weeks. So we retire one and we
Twice a month.
add one.
Twice
And
a month.
and this is free. Like this is an amazing way to train your team. Like I can't emphasize how important it is to get your team, your dev team, to understand the attacker mindset. And we have a whole session about it. But if you want to write secure code, you have to think like an attacker. If you want proof for that, SQL injection has been around for 20 years. I would say 70% of the developers have heard about it. The knowledge is there, but it's still in the OWASP top 10 20 years later because they continuously miss the advanced and sort of how attackers bypass all their protections. So and where can you enter the SQL injection? So this is just an example. You need to make sure that people solve and patch at the root cause of the problem and not at the symptoms. So yeah, that's it. Itzik, any closing words?
Maybe just a couple words. Yesterday we released challenge number 35. Give it a try. It's a little tricky. So this one is hard. This one is hard. Only 7 solved it since yesterday. And so I would give it a try. It's really fun, a fun one.
Okay, great. So that's it. We'll meet again next week to go over CTF9. We'll solve that. Meanwhile, you can just head over to wizer-ctf.com and just try it yourself. Bye bye.
Thank you guys. Bye.
Bye.